4. Gains are shared more equally than ever before. The defining characteristic of economics in the 1950s is that the country got rich by making the poor less poor. Average wages doubled from 1940 to 1948, then doubled again by 1963, and those gains focused on those who had been left behind for decades before. The gap between rich and poor narrowed by an extraordinary amount. Lewis Allen wrote in 1955, "The enormous lead of the well-to-do in the economic race has been considerably reduced." It is the industrial workers who as a group have done best. People such as a steel worker's family who used to live on $2,500 and now are getting $4,500, or the highly skilled machine tool operator's family who used to have 3,000 and now can spend an annual 5,500 or more. As for the top 1%, the really well-to-do and the rich, whom we might classify very roughly indeed as the $16,000 and over group, their share of the total national income after taxes had come down by 1945 from 13% to 7%. This was not a short-term trend. Real income for the bottom 20% of wage earners grew by a nearly identical amount as the top 5% from 1950 to 1980. The equality went beyond wages. Women held jobs outside the home in record numbers. Their labor force participation rate went from 31% after the war to 37% by 1955 and to 40% by 1965. Minorities gained too. After the 1945 inauguration, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote about an African American reporter who told her, "Do you realize what 12 years have done? If at the 1933 reception a number of colored people had gone down the line and mixed with everyone else in the way they did today, every paper in the country would have reported it. We do not even think it is news and none of us will mention it." Women and minority rights were still a fraction of what they are today, but the progress towards equality in the late 40s and 50s was extraordinary. The leveling out of classes meant a leveling out of lifestyle. Normal people drove Chevys, rich people drove Cadillacs. TV and radio equalized entertainment and culture people enjoyed regardless of class. Mail order catalogs equalized the clothes people wore and the goods they bought regardless of where they lived. Harper's Magazine noted in 1957, "The rich man smokes the same sort of cigarettes as the poor man, shaves with the same sort of razor, uses the same sort of telephone, vacuum cleaner, radio and TV set, has the same sort of lighting and heating equipment in his house," and so on indefinitely. The differences between his automobile and the poor man's are minor, especially they have similar engines, similar fittings. In the early years of the century, there was a hierarchy of automobiles. Paul Graham wrote in 2016 about what something as simple as there only being 3 TV stations did to equalize culture. It's difficult to imagine now, but every night tens of millions of families would sit down together in front of their TV set watching the same show at the same time as their next door neighbors. What happens now with the Super Bowl used to happen every night. We were literally in sync. This was important. People measure their well-being against their peers, and for most of the 1945-1980 period, people had a lot of what looked like peers to compare themselves to. Most people, lived lives that were either equal or at least fathomable to those around them. The idea that people's lives equalized as much as their income is an important point of the story we'll come back to. 5. Debt rose tremendously, but so did incomes, so the impact wasn't a big deal. Household debt increased fivefold from 1947 to 1957 due to the combination of the new consumption culture, new debt products, and interest rates subsidized by government and held low by Federal Reserve. But income growth was so strong during this period that the impact on households wasn't severe, and household debt was so low to begin with after the war. The Great Depression wiped out a lot of it, and household spending was so curtailed during the war that debt accumulation was restricted. So the growth in household debt to income from 1947 to 57 was manageable. Household debt to income today is just over 100%. Even after rising in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, it stayed below 60%. Driving a lot of this debt boom was a surge in home ownership. The home ownership rate in 1900 was 47%. It stayed about there for the next 4 decades. Then it took off, hitting 53% by 1945 and 62% by 70. A substantial portion of the population was now using debt that previous generations could not have accessed, and they were mostly okay with it. David Halberstam writes in his book The 50s, they were confident in themselves and their futures in a way that growing up in harder times found striking. They did not fear debt as their parents had. They differed from their parents not just in how much they made and what they owned, but in their belief that the future had already arrived. As the first homeowners in their family, they brought a new excitement and pride with them to the store as they bought furniture or appliances. In other times, young couples might have exhibited such feelings as they bought clothes for their first baby. It was as if the very accomplishment of owning a home reflected such an immense breakthrough that nothing was too good to buy for it. Now's a good time to connect a few things, and they'll become increasingly important. America is booming. It's booming together like never before. It's booming with debt that isn't a big deal at the time because it's still low relative to income, and there's cultural acceptance that debt isn't a scary thing.